Welcome to the Parent Connect 305 podcast, where our goal is to get you in and out in less than 30 minutes with some practical parenting tips. We know that you, as a parent or caregiver, that your time is extremely important and also limited. So our goal is to hook you up with high-quality parenting tips and resources to help you with parenting your child. My name is Dr. Jason Gent, one of the hosts of this podcast, and I am a parenting expert and also a licensed psychologist. I always like to preface every podcast and every talk that I give with the fact that I'm also a parent, and a flawed one at that. So I know that all the tips and resources that we provide here are easier said than done. With that said, I hope you take a listen. In our first episode, I interview a fellow parenting expert who's going to let us know a little bit more about when our child may need some additional help or services. I hope you enjoy. All right, so welcome to Parent Connect, the podcast where we're really focusing on trying to connect parents and caregivers with simple and practical tips for parenting their kids. Our goal really through doing these podcasts is to help parents connect not only to some good parenting tips, but also to learn potential options for services when a podcast or a website may not be enough. Our topic today is it's a hard one. It's one that many parents have struggled with. This is we'd love to say that there's a manual for parenting. There are some books out there, but we also know that every kid is a little bit different. And a tough question that parents sometimes have to answer is how to decide when their child or their family might need some additional help. Oftentimes for younger children, we hear of these phases like the terrible twos, the ferocious threes. I've heard many parents say over the years that this is really, it's just a phase that my kid is going through, that they'll grow out of it. Or it could be that they only have behavior problems in certain places. It could be just at school. It could be just on the playground. Maybe things are tough on the playground. I don't know. But these are the things that we want to kind of walk through some different questions about that help parents kind of think through, hey, is this maybe just a phase? Is this just a normal part of my child's development? Or is this something that's like, maybe I could use some additional help with this? And we're going to try and equip you with some resources. So my name is Dr. Jason Gent. I'm a clinical psychologist here at the University of Miami. I'm a parenting expert, but I also have a great other parenting expert with me today, Mr. Dante Bernard. He is currently an esteemed pediatric psychology resident here at UM. And he is finishing up his PhD in clinical psychology from one of the top clinical programs in the country. Top 2 to be specific. We don't even want to make sure that it's top 5. And he has many years of experience of doing different kinds of parenting programs, with working with lots of different kinds of families, specializing really with kids with more like disruptive behaviors, or kids are kind of getting in trouble for not following rules or arguing back, or maybe even becoming physically aggressive or verbally aggressive at times. So Dante, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. So let's hop right in. We want to get these kind of short, sweet. We know that parents are very, very busy. So we want to kind of give them information as quickly as possible and not be as long-winded as me.
I'll try my best.
All right. So most parents, they really are trying their best. And many times it really is difficult to decide, like, okay, can I do this on my own? Yeah. Or is this something that I can figure out on my own with my child? Or is it like, hey, maybe I need to talk to a professional or someone in the community that might be able to help with this? So what can you say to those parents or caregivers who might be struggling with this decision?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, parents are navigating so many different things at a time, and there's so much on their plate that sometimes it's really difficult for them to realize or acknowledge maybe my child does need help, right? So there are several things that I like to have parents consider, especially if they're thinking about moving forward with trying to seek out services. The first is, do the parents view this behavior as a problem? And second is, what are the types of the behaviors are they seeing? There are, of course, several different kids who can display several different types of behaviors, right? But what do they consider problematic, and how problematic is it relative to their peers? For example, if a kid is yelling and screaming, if one parent sees it as fine, does another parent have a lot of problems with that if that's their child?
Sure. So when you say peers, What does that mean? Because I mean, I know that there's some kids
Yeah.
like they like to hang out with older kids
Yeah.
and they want to be like the older kids. Like,
Yeah.
what would peers
That's a
be?
good question. That's a good. When I say peers, I mean kids their age.
Okay.
So developmentally normative behaviors, if you will.
Sure.
So things that we expect to happen around a child of your age.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay. So for some of these parents, maybe like their child's still at home with them. Maybe they're not regularly exposed to schooling where there
Right.
is kind of that reference. What are some other places that you could think of where maybe like they can kind of like figure out where their kid is compared to other
Yeah,
kids?
one thing is like going out in public, for
Okay.
example, right? Taking your kid to a grocery store
Okay.
and seeing how well they're doing. I think we can all think of the kid who's running up and down the aisles or
Sure.
throwing the boxes down.
Sure.
We would consider those behaviors to be something that could be considered to be problematic.
Right.
Another addition I'd like to think about is how intense are the behaviors, right? Is this
Sure.
something that kind of ebbs and flows,
Sure.
or is it something that's always ramping up at a 10?
Okay.
And if it is that intense, so like a kid at a restaurant throwing the
Right.
forks down, throwing the food down,
Sure.
Parents having to think about I can't even go out in public anymore because my kid's doing this stuff. Those are the times when parents might be thinking about maybe treatment might be appropriate for us.
Okay. All right. Those are all good things to know, and I think we've all been in those places.
Yeah.
Where we've heard those things, and I know sometimes if you're on an airplane, maybe you have a different
Yes,
opinion of what that
course.
might be.
Of course.
But you feel for those parents that are trying just to do their best in the moment
Right.
for their kiddos. One of the things that I was just kind of thinking about, and something we talked about a little bit before the interview started, is just kind of that there's different kinds of parents, right, or parenting styles. Wonder if you could speak a little bit to like different parenting styles and kind of
Yeah.
how that might relate to children's behavior. So
Yeah.
it's not only like a kid behavior thing, and kind of like where the parent fits
Right.
into that equation.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question. There are so many different types of parenting styles out there. And some people say that they're kind of formed from the way we were parented, right?
Sure.
Either I want to parent the same way or I want to parent completely different from my family and how they parented me. So there are kind of four major ones that we think of in our field. So one is the permissive parent, right?
Sure.
The one that says like there are no rules, let kids just be kids.
You do you.
There are no consequences,
Right.
right? You do you. And we can all think about this parent and kind of see them in our minds. The opposite of that is that authoritarian parent, right? Where it's what I say goes, you are to be seen, not heard, right? The one that rules with the iron fist, if you will, where there are hardcore consequences for everything the child does. There's also this one parent that's also referred to as the uninvolved parent, or the parent who doesn't really do anything, completely hands-off.
Right.
One would almost consider it to be like a bit problematic with how hands-off they are.
Sure.
Kind of let the kids run wild and do their own thing. There's a final one that we refer to as the authoritative parent. And this is kind of a combination of all the ones that I've just referred to, where we have the parent who has some consequences, allows the child to kind of have some exploration, and also allows the child to have some autonomy, right?
Okay.
But all within healthy bounds, right?
Sure.
So the parent is still there. They're still trying to have an active role in the child's life, but not trying to control every aspect of their life.
No micromanagement
Yes,
there?
no micromanagement. Not the helicopter parent,
Sure.
if you will.
Okay.
And we consider that parenting style to be one of the more healthier parenting styles.
Okay.
As there's a lot of literature to suggest that type of parenting style leads to better developmental outcomes later on for children.
That's good for parents to know, and I think it's also one of those things that when I heard you kind of describing different styles, like, oh, man, I'm a little bit of this one, I'm a little bit of this one, and I know that it's hard to kind of strive and find that right kind of balance.
Right. Parents never really fit in like one neatly, right?
Right.
There might be some flavors of every one
Sure.
of those in there. Absolutely.
Sure. So we might be in one box, but like bleeding over
Exactly,
the other
right.
box. Okay.
Right.
Another question that I had is, I've heard many times over the years of us running parenting programs here, my child never listens to me. Things, I have to get to the point of screaming. And just wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of how these kinds of parent-child interactions can emerge or develop over time, where like it's only when the kid's screaming that the parent goes away, or the parent's screaming and the kid goes away. So.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and the one that's really common from parents. Like, my kid only responds when I yell at them.
Sure.
And I like to tell parents this isn't something that exists within a vacuum.
Right.
Said differently, this isn't something that just happens.
Sure.
It's something that's learned over time.
Okay.
Right? Kids are very, very intelligent. They're sponges, and they soak up ways in which they can interact with their parents. Parents are also the same way. They learn very quickly what is effective and what is not. So, for example, if a child is not wanting to do something the first time they ask them to do it, a parent might learn that me just simply asking my child to do something in a nice voice isn't effective.
Right.
So they might ramp up the ways in which they say that.
Sure,
So
sure.
maybe yell a little bit or raise their voice. And that might work the first couple times. So then they learn that I can't talk to my kid in just a normal voice. I have to raise my voice to yell at them. But over time, the kid might learn, I don't really have to respond to that either because there's
Right.
no follow-through.
Sure.
So then the parent might have to learn, well, if I threaten them, if you don't pick up this toy, you're going to have to go to timeout.
Right.
Then there's now, all right, the child responds immediately to that. So after a while, we find that children sometimes learn that I can ignore that warning or I can ignore my parents raising their voice. And it gets to this level of hitting, timeout, for excessive periods of time, removal of privileges in a way that we might consider to be not quite right? Something that we might think about differently. So parents almost learn these maladaptive ways of managing their kids' behavior, but it also works on the flip side.
Sure.
Where the child learns these ways and in their mind is adaptive of not having to comply.
They just want to have fun, right?
Kids want to have fun.
Have fun.
And if that
and
means
there's
having
no
to ignore
consequences.
my parents and letting them yell and scream, if I get to still keep building my tower,
Yeah.
I'll keep still building my tower.
I think most of us in life would do that.
Yeah,
Right?
if I didn't have to go to work, right?
Yeah,
It
if
doesn't
I
work that way.
not go to work, still get paid,
Right.
no consequences, no one yells at me,
Right.
like, I may not show up to work,
Yeah.
right? I may not be doing this podcast.
Right.
Thank you. Those are really helpful
course,
tips
of
and
course.
kind of helping us kind of understand how these things may come
Yeah.
up over time. So one of the things is you talked a little bit about the different parenting styles, and I've had this happen where there's lots of parents that come in. They have 3 kids. They've kind of used kind of the same thing with the first 2 kids.
Yeah.
They get to that 3rd kid, try and do the same parenting stuff, and they hit a brick wall. Like it's not working at all. And we kind of talk about that as something that's like a goodness of fit between the parent, kind of the child's temperament or personality. Can you explain a little bit more about kind of how this works for people that may be a little bit less familiar with this
Yeah,
topic?
for sure. I think we can all think of those multi-family households when we think about one child who's completely different from that of their siblings. And one way I'd like to explain this to parents is there are several kids out there who don't respond the same way to the way we parent another kid. Right. So my sister, for example, needs a lot more attention than I needed when I was younger. My parents might disagree, but there's these different strategies that we have to
No hard
employ.
feelings.
Yes, no hard feelings. You can tell I'm not really harboring that at all. But there are parents who have to almost tweak the ways in which they parent or tweak the amount of attention that's required for one child versus another, as children are so different from one another.
Sure.
So what that means is what I used to use for one kid may not be as effective for this kid over here. So parents almost have to learn a different way of interacting with a child to match up with that temperament that you were speaking of,
Right.
which requires effort. It requires work because it's something that I thought would work isn't working here. So we almost have to help them kind of tweak some things to help them better interact with this other kid.
Yeah, I've heard parents kind of like, at times kind of feel a bit of like resentment of like, well, I have to do more for this child. But, and I remember having foggy baby brain and, just like you're kind of a zombie the first few years because sleep is not a thing that you get as
not
much
a thing
of.
anymore.
But the reality is the first time is you had to put a lot of effort to kind of figure out parenting for that child, and you kind of had hoped, well, we've kind of been through this rodeo once.
Right.
Number 2, number 3 will be the same.
Right.
And the reality is that, it may actually be more effort, but it's maybe probably still less effort than you had to put forth for kind of learning how to parent that first child.
Absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about kind of some of the different parenting styles, and you're finishing up your PhD right now. So for me, reaching back into my psychology classes, like it's going like way back into the archives. For you, maybe not as much.
Sure.
Just kind of reaching back in some of those psychology classes and just telling us a little bit more about kind of those different parenting styles and how there might be a connection to, how that might actually be a little bit different for like different cultures, right? So for some, like, it may, particular parenting style may work a little bit more. I know we can't speak globally with respect to that, but just anything that you could speak to.
There's been a burgeoning amount of literature that has been looking at the differences in this parenting styles, right? So a lot of this emerging literature is beginning to unpack, well, how do these things look culturally? How might these things look different between different cultural or racial ethnic groups. And it's really interesting. So traditionally we kind of think about this authoritative parent, or kind of that parent that allows these healthy boundaries, allows for a lot of exploration to be the optimal parent, if you will. But that's not the case for all groups, right? So for example, in the African American community, there's actually some literature to suggest that authoritative parent, or the one that might rule with the iron fist, leads to more positive outcomes for that kid. And if we think about why this is the case, if we think about some of the socioeconomic statuses or some of the resources or environments that people are living in, I'm not saying that all black families live in these poor settings, because that's definitely not the case. But for some, in these areas where there is a lot of high violence, for example, we know that some families say, no, you're not going to go outside for X, Y, and Z reasons, right? And that's
there's very good reasons for that, right?
So we know that these strict boundaries are actually put in place to help protect the child from these more risky behaviors or risky outcomes, as opposed to families who have more of the, independence and safety to navigate their environments in more optimal settings, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think you bring us some really good points. Is having been somebody that's run various parenting programs. Learned a lot about the parenting programs that exist down here in Miami-Dade County, is a lot of times these curriculums were developed in places that don't match up with kind of the particular culture or cultures of the community. But you bring up some really good points with the idea of not just kind of looking at the family unit, but kind of the system that they live within and the neighborhoods, and kind of their own social connections, their own social network. So thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Of course.
So for parents that kind of, have just heard some of these answers, kind of like thinking about different parenting styles, how do they kind of self-identify, kind of where do I fit amongst kind of these different parenting styles or categories? Is there a BuzzFeed quiz or something like that, or you can just do it and like, oh, this is what I am. And I don't see a lot of those showing up on social media. But anything you speak to with respect to that?
Yeah, while social media definitely, it would be lovely to have those things, you might be quicker to find out what Gilmore Girl you are as opposed to what parenting style you might have.
I wish I knew, but I just don't. So.
So there are actually a lot of psych websites that are out there, a lot of psychology websites that will help you to kind of assess where you are. I think Psych Central, for example, has a really good tool or really good resource that can help that. And I think we're going to be posting that for...
we can put that in the show notes, so if people are interested in kind of... We'll have the hyperlink directly to that site for them.
And what I found is being able to take these quizzes provides a little bit of insight for me to know, all right, this is my tendencies when I'm interacting with children, right? If I'm the authoritative parent, right, maybe I need to know that this whole rule setting thing might not work. Or if I'm the more permissive parent, maybe I need to realize that I need to implement more strategies to help them add some more guidelines or boundaries. So this is definitely not an end-all, be-all. As we said, there are different types of flavors, right, that of a parent you might be. But it is definitely helpful to at least acknowledge this might be my general tendency as I move forward.
Sure. And again, this is these online quizzes are probably not going to be the same as getting your blood pressure checked in terms of how on target it is, but like you said, it kind of just gives you a general picture, especially if it's something that you're trying to figure out for yourself. So I brought this up a little bit at the beginning of our conversation, and it is because making that decision to invest in kind of going and seeing a professional or hey, I think I need some parenting classes. It's a big investment of time and energy. So for the parents, maybe it's just a phase. Maybe what are some tips that you can give for parents to kind of think through how they can determine whether their child's behavior problems are just a phase versus something else?
Yeah, I have two answers for that. So one is more of the kind of social answer, and what that means is it's okay to go and seek treatment. It's okay to do this. I think in our society, there's this general stigma against going to seek treatment. If my kid is going to therapy, that means there's something wrong with them. And that's not the case. And that's something that we try to sell within these programs. And some kids just need a different style, and that's what we're here for. This is particularly important for different cultural groups or different racial groups, right? So as you mentioned earlier, a lot of these programs weren't really built with the minds or with the idea of racial and ethnic groups in mind. So it's really important to say that it's okay to go to this, right? So that's one, my kind of soapbox answer.
I want to add to your soapbox for a second. You kind of brought up a point that I liked is we think about a lot of times, not every parent, they may not have the time or the resources, but they're trying to connect their kid to kind of like different activities so their child can excel at doing whatever those activities are. Connecting and going to parenting classes is you're devoting time and energy to helping your child be the best human being possible, which I think is a pretty okay thing to do. Important. I mean, I hope so.
Right. I think that's absolutely important. And then my second, more formal answer there are several resources in place that can help parents figure out maybe this might be appropriate for them. So in the Miami-Dade County area, for example, they can call 211, which is a really cool resource that can really help direct them to the resources they need to figure out maybe I am eligible for this. Maybe my kid does need extra attention. And again, I think that's going to be another resource we're going to be providing for families.
Sure. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes.
And another really good resource is they can complete an online free screening. And I think that's the best option for me, right? The more accessible these resources are, the better. And if they're older than 7, they can go to this Mental Health America website, which I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so like here in Miami-Dade County, you got 0 to 7. Mental Health America is just kind of online. It's anonymous. You're not putting a lot of personal information there. They do millions of mental health screens per year, and there's just a specific parent one that will just kind of give you, another way for you to investigate. I think that a lot of times nowadays, if we think we need help with anything or like something's going wrong with a car, we don't immediately go to the mechanic. We use the Google.
Yeah,
right?
We
bust out the Google and kind of see what might be going on, and these might be some resources that can help with that as well.
And then I think the last one is just making use of the resources that are available at the schools. It's very easy to say, hey, I need my kid to get screened at school to figure out what might be going on.
Absolutely.
And if there are any other resources that the school can provide, such as an individualized education plan or a 504 plan, anything that can help the kid get additional attention or things that will help them in the classroom.
Yeah, that's going to help with their learning, for sure. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's just say that there might be one, and hopefully there's at least one listening to this. And they're saying it sounds like, I could probably use some help based on the things that I've heard so far. I don't really have the time. I definitely don't have the money to go to a parenting class. What do you have to say to them? What solutions do you have for them?
First, I hear you, right? On the one hand, I get it. There is so much time that you have that's dedicated to so many other things. We're going
to add hours into the day.
Yeah, right. We're going to add that 25th hour, the really valuable hour. I also realize that this might not be your only kid. And I definitely understand that with this being not your only kid, potentially, there are other obligations throughout the day.
Right.
That being said, it's really important to think about how much time you're putting into managing this kid's behavior.
Sure,
right?
Absolutely.
So if you're thinking about waking up in the morning, trying to get their clothes on, trying to get them their bath time, trying to get them to eat their food, trying to get them to go to sleep, all this time cumulatively adds up to take away from so many of the other responsibilities you're probably talking about or thinking about now.
Right.
So think, if you were just able to come to this program or come to any of these programs that we have, think about the benefits that would have. Think about how much time that you would have to yourself after you've learned these strategies and after your child has learned these strategies to have to yourself or to have to whatever else. I like to tell parents that time in is the time that you're going to get out.
Yes, no, right? That makes a lot of sense.
If you are spending this time with your child, right, if you are able to communicate better with your child, think of how much time that would save you.
Sure.
And I think that time
and
analysis
just the quality of the time.
Quality, right.
If I have this time, don't want to be yelling.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe you do.
I would hope not, right. But, and not only the time, but the quality of relationships that you have as well.
Right.
We know that this program can boost the relationship that you have with your children. And even if it's positive, it can make it that much more positive.
Sure.
And the skills that you learn within these programs can be applied to the other children that you have in the family as well. So there are so many benefits that, in my opinion, outweigh a lot of these kind of time analyses that we put into place. But it does mean that sometimes it takes a reorganization of priorities.
Yeah, I hear you on that front. And I think that that's still something that a lot of parents struggle with. It's like, that's great. I'd love to go to a parenting class. I work, I've had parents say, like, I work 2 jobs, or I have a rotating schedule. So, like, hey, there's this class that's Tuesdays at 6 p.m., but I don't know until the week before whether or not I have to work, or hey, I'm working 2 jobs just so that my child has a place to live. So unless they have parenting workshops between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m., those may not be options. Is there any kinds of help out there for those individuals?
Absolutely,
or those parents?
Absolutely. There's this really groundbreaking thing that we really like. It's called Pocket PCIT. And what this is a free resource that almost essentially functions as a crash course for some of these therapies that we're referring to, or these interventions that we're referring to. And it's a nice program for kids ages 2 to 12 that really breaks down some of the things that we know are essential in developing that parent-child relationship.
Sure.
That's essential in reducing some of these behavioral issues that we see. And it's really cool. It's something that you can read on your own time. Read during your 20-minute lunch break, your 30-minute lunch break. Not only is it just text, but there are also videos included in there as well. So it's a really awesome tool that can be used and read at your own time.
Yeah, I mean, I think people learn different ways. Some people learn from listening to podcasts.
Yep.
Some people
Yep.
learn from reading, and that's how they read. Other people, they need to see it. Some people, they need to practice it. So I kind of like I may have some potential bias in terms of how much I like that website.
Just a bit.
Just a little bit. But hey, if that's not someone's cup of tea, what are some other things that are out there?
Yeah. So there's a program called Triple P, which is a paid online resource. It's about $80. But it's available to toddlers, tweens, and teens, and it's a really nice program that can, again, help these children. There's another program referred to as PCIT, or Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, which is kind of the more in-depth or more elongated version of this Pocket PCIT, where you're meeting with a therapist on a weekly basis. There's a thing called iPCIT, which is a virtual platform in which this PCIT takes place, where parents are actually speaking virtually with a clinician to bring them almost inside their homes, right? Which is a really cool tool. So there are several different versions of these different parenting programs out there, and I encourage parents to really check them out and look at them to figure out what the best tool would be for them.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point of just kind of taking the time, especially if you're going to be committing the time to kind of learn a little bit more before you kind of figure out what is kind of the best fit for your
absolutely.
family. So we've kind of talked a lot about kind of what do you do, kind of figuring out whether or not your child has some problems, maybe some resources. We always want it to be a point of Parent Connect, that we want parents or other caregivers in kids' lives to walk away with simple and practical things that they can do now to kind of either improve the relationship with the child, help with maybe a specific child behavior problem. So kind of just as we're winding up here, what are maybe 1 to 2 practical tips that you could provide parents listening to right now that you think would be a big win for them that could help them out?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, positive attention matters. And in my opinion, I would argue that positive attention matters so much more than that of negative attention. As an example of this, saying, "Thank you so much for picking up your toys," is so much more effective than saying something like, don't knock over your toys, right?
Yeah.
Don't put this thing there, put it here.
Sure.
So being intentional about saying what you like your child to do, as opposed to saying what you like they didn't do.
Yeah, I see you still have not picked up your toys.
Right.
All right, that's good. That's kind of, it's critical, and
exactly.
It still doesn't help you get what you want your child to do, right? But they probably feel worse about themselves.
Right.
Maybe that was the intent, maybe not, but it still doesn't get you to kind of where you wanted the child to go with their behavior.
And we know this positive attention can really help mold the child's behavior, which kind of bleeds into the second thing, only if we're consistent.
Sure.
Consistency matters just as much as this attention that we're giving them. And if we're not being consistent with the way in which we praise our children, the ways in which we're giving attention to our children, the amount of time we're spending with our children, it can really have implications later on down the line that can make or break the behaviors that you want to see.
Right.
So in my opinion, the attention that we give our child matters, and the consistency in which we're giving that attention matters just as much.
I agree, and I think one of the things that pops up is those things just be such huge changes for families. That one of the things that comes into play is behavior change just in general is just really, really hard.
It is.
And so maybe it's kind of looking at the two things. We want to have global positive attention, but sometimes I think just a nice starting point for parents is pick one thing that that maybe your child struggles with. Maybe your child is going through maybe a bit of a hitting phase or something at this point, the amount of time that it takes a child to hit somebody is usually less than a second. Even if a child's hitting at a high frequency, maybe 5 to 10 seconds a day, that's only 5 to 10 seconds of the day. Your child's what they're doing with their hands, those gentle hands.
Yeah.
The rest of the day, there's plenty of opportunities for parents to give attention. So even just being consistent or intentional about providing praise for that one thing that you want your child to be working on. So whenever your child's like, hey, their hands are to themselves, they're not wrapped around somebody's neck. All right, this is spectacular. I'm going to go ahead and give a praise. Thank you for keeping your hands to yourself, or thank you for using your gentle hands around the pet, or things like that. So,
which looks so much different than saying thank you for not hitting the pet, right? Thank
Absolutely.
you for not doing this, right?
Yep, you're letting them know what you want to see.
Exactly.
More. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out.
Thank you for having me.
It's our first episode, so you're going to be a legend someday.
Hopefully setting the bar high.
Set the bar super high. Other people are going to listen. Is going to be afraid to come on.
Yeah,
it would just be me interviewing myself in the future.
I'll come back on then again. Just
okay, there we go. So, reminding you, for those of you that might be listening, so again, some practical tips here. You can call 211. If you live in Miami-Dade County, you can search online for programs at thechildrenstrust.org. We'll put all this stuff in the show notes. Jewish Community Services South Florida, they have the 211 online directory, and a lot of our parenting programs will actually have a link up on pocketpcit.com, or we'll have a map up there, and you can actually search for providers there as well. So thank you for giving us a listen. Check out the show notes if you're looking for some of those additional resources, and we'll see you next time on Parent Connect.